David Brewster here with another 3 for All, and this is 3 Jimi Hendrix Licks from 1969. And of course, Jimi Hendrix is the legendary guitar legend. I think he kind of eclipses all guitar legends, and I think a lot of players hold him in a very high regard with a level of respect and admiration. I mean, he's a pioneer. He changed electric guitar forever. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just go back and listen to, rock music from the early to mid 60s before Hendrix really hit the scene. And it sounds noticeably different. Folk rock was very popular. You had the Mamas and the Papas and America and the Byrds and groups like that. And there's nothing wrong with that music. But then you just keep kind of moving along. And then when you get to around 1967, you notice something changing. And you hear, groups like Cream and some of those bands start hitting the scene. And when Jimi Hendrix and the Jimi Hendrix Experience hit the scene, I mean, it changed things almost overnight. People were just like, what is that? Is that a guitar? Who's playing it? It's that guy. And he's playing a right-handed guitar left-handed. And I mean, he really did just send everybody back to the drawing board, and they were scratching their heads. And look at people like Eric Clapton and Pete Townsend. They were scared of Hendrix. They thought, well, this guy just showed up and he's going to take all of our jobs and our gigs. They were terrified at first, but then they kind of got to know him, and they met him, and they all fell in love with Hendrix. The Beatles loved him. Everybody loved Hendrix back then. I do think in the modern world, the first mistake a lot of people make is they compare Hendrix to a modern guitarist. And you can't do that. That's like comparing a modern baseball player to Mickey Mantle or something. It's the same game, but it's changed a little bit. So, you can't compare Hendrix to like Jeff Loomis or somebody, or Steve Vai or whatever. That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. You really can't do that. But you have to think back at that time, and you have to compare Jimmy to other players on the scene. And you had people like, definitely an early Jimmy Page, early Eric Clapton, early Jeff Beck, Pete Townsend, Keith Richards, and some of those players. They just saw Hendrix he was a monument of blues rock music, whipped out all these licks and tones and all these different things that nobody was doing. And it just made everybody stop and take notice. And they borrowed and stole as much as they could from him. And he really is, very important, and even if you're not a big Hendrix fan, you don't like the music, or maybe you don't like music from the 60s, or whatever the problem is, you have to respect Jimi Hendrix. If you don't, then in a roundabout way, you don't really respect the electric guitar. In a lot of ways, I feel like Chuck Berry, definitely is the king of rock and roll. And then you start kind of, going through there, and there's James Burton and a whole bunch of other important people. But the next person in line, when you start going down this list of players, is Jimi Hendrix, and his name is as big as anybody. The licks in this lesson actually came from a kind of a bootleg. It looked like maybe a TV appearance in Switzerland in 1969. And you also have to remember, this is like the end of the Experience. Like, this is right before Hendrix kind of pulled the plug and started, Band of Gypsies. And you can tell when you watch the concert, it's a little less than an hour. But you can tell there's something going on between Jimmy and Noel Redding, big time, on stage, because it's happening right there during the concert. Jimmy keeps making these faces, and it seems like Noel keeps turning his amps up, and it's really awkward. When you're watching it, you're like, there's something going on between them. You can tell. They're either fighting or arguing or something. And, but anyway, when you're watching the footage, it's just really interesting to notice like how free and loose it is. They're tuning on stage, full volume. Speaking of the tuning, Jimmy and the band is out of tune the whole time. And even when they very first start, before they start the first song, they start tuning, live on stage. And you can hear even then, like before they even started the first song, they're hopelessly out of tune. And then as it goes along, he eventually grabs an SG and he starts playing, his SG. And even that's a little bit out of tune. So I don't know what's going on with the tuning for this lesson. So what I did is I literally learned the licks that the pitch of the video was. And if you do that, you're going to notice that almost everything is down a whole step. Like songs that are in the key of E are suddenly in the key of D, or songs in the key of B are suddenly in the key of A. And I tried to figure out what was going on. It's an old recording. My educated guess would be that Jimi was tuned down a half step, and then over the years and the transfer and copying, and maybe it was like a old reel-to-reel or a VCR or something, and maybe just the speed of that recording and the video, slowed down just a little bit, which would affect the pitch, and that would bring his half step down another half step, where it basically is a whole step lower than normal. So I don't know what's going on with the tuning. I literally wrote and performed all these licks according to the way they sound on the video. The thing I really like about live, Hendrix, bootlegs and video footage and recordings is when he would talk to the crowd, because that's one of the only times, unless it was a recorded interview, but that's one of the only times you could really hear Jimi talking. And usually when he spoke to the crowd, he was completely being himself, just casual and relaxed, and spoke to the crowd. And he was funny. I mean, he was very funny and had a wicked, sense of humor. And I've heard audio bootlegs of him goofing around in the studio and imitating Elvis and stuff. And it's hilarious. It's like, oh my gosh, that's Hendrix? He was really funny. But here's a quick clip of him addressing the crowd. And I just thought this was hilarious.
We're going to play nothing but oldies but baddies tonight.
The first lick is from Killing Floor, and that's normally in the key of A, but on this footage, in the video footage I found, it's actually in the key of G. And for some reason, it fits perfectly in the key of G. But that song's normally performed in A. Or if Jimi was tuned down a half step, it would be A flat. So once again, I don't know what's going on with the tuning or the pitch of this video. I just learned it the way it is on YouTube. But the lick, it's definitely really expressive. He's put a lot of energy into it. It's very simple, but he's doing this. And I just love the way he's, very expressive with that bend. And he's bending, F up to a G. And then slowly brings it down. And he's still holding on to that bend. And I also like the way he comes down. Because right there he's grabbing the C, he's going to bend that up to a D, and then return it back to C, and then he's grabbing that B flat, and then ending on that G. And that's kind of a signature Hendrix move, that very expressive bending and vibrato, and just holding notes, and maybe letting the note feed back or sustain a little bit, and then he changes the pitch or adds vibrato or grabs the bar. But that's a very, telltale Hendrix type of lick. But here's the clip from '69 with Hendrix playing that. The next lick takes place during the performance of Hey Joe, and Hey Joe's normally in the key of E, but on this concert footage everything sounds, a whole step lower. So it sounds like it's in the key of D. So the lick looks like this. And like I said, Hey Joe is typically in the key of E. And that little chromatic, riff at the end's typically like this. Right? But down a whole step lower, it's going to be in the key of D, like that. And I really like that phrase where he's basically grabbing, a little piece of D major, grabbing the sus4, and then he eventually slides into that A. And then kind of comes down that little partial arpeggio. And then we're converting that chromatic riff to the key of D. So to do that, we have to kind of, change the pitch of a few of the notes like this. And then right there when he hits that F note, he starts double picking. And I'm a huge double picking fan. Something like that. So even though the pitch of the song is in the wrong place, there's still some cool things you can pick up from learning, those licks and phrases in the key of D. If you don't want to do it in the key of D, you could move it back up to E. You know, like that. The next lick's this busy little phrase he does during Red House, and Red House is typically in the key of B, or B7, but on this footage it sounds like it's in the key of A, and it's something like this. And it's busy and frantic, you know, and he's definitely racing around. You know, something like that. So it's interesting, you know, if we think of this in the key of A, you know, instead of the typical B, you know, for Red House, you know, it's definitely a different beast in a different key. But right there you can see we're kind of playing out of the box at first, and I'm definitely using Hendrix's technique. I'm kind of avoiding my pinky, which I normally don't play that way, but for licks like this, especially if you're trying to play it authentically, that's how Hendrix did it, so I'm kind of trying to channel, you know, his way of doing it. But he did, that's the first part. And then right there, he starts doing that pull-off, you know, C to A to that G. So it's weird, he kind of flipped that first pull-off. Like that, and then shift in the next position. And then right there, he's kind of going in almost to like a hybrid D blues. He's grabbing like the major third. You know, kind of think of D, you know, like a D blues. So I'm not really sure what happened there, but he just slipped into. But then that lick all together. And then here's the footage from '69 with him playing that, and that's a frantic, crazy little lick. Here's a bonus lick from this footage, and this also takes place during Red House. And keep in mind, once again, we're actually playing Red House in the key of A, you know, with this footage. And so this lick actually appears over the 5 chord. So typically in Red House, the 5 chord would be F sharp or F sharp 7. But in this footage, it sounds like E. It's a whole step lower, right? So this is interesting because he's playing over E or E7, and he keeps targeting the 6th right here, the C sharp, and has this real jazzy kind of flavor, something like this. You know, keep in mind, once again, that's over E. Getting ready to go back, you know, to that A. And it's just really interesting to kind of see that lick. And I play licks like that a lot over, you know, like 9th chords. You know, there's an E9. But I like how he added, you know, a chromatic note right there, that E flat. That's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with 3 Jimi Hendrix licks from 1969. I'm a huge Hendrix fan. I've been a fan since I was in high school, and I really fell into him like when I was in college, and I had friends and some instructors, you know, like at AIM down in Atlanta, Georgia, that were really into Hendrix, and I just fed off that. I was like, wow, you know, and I really hadn't gone there until around that time. I was so obsessed with Van Halen and Steve Vai and all those people. When I finally visited Hendrix, it was like my whole musical world, just was turned upside down. I was looking at things differently and playing differently, and I really fell into him, just like I fell into Jeff Beck and Led Zeppelin and a bunch of other music before my time. Because technically Hendrix, was dead and gone before I was even born. But by the time I picked up a guitar and started playing and I noticed him, I knew before I even went there, I knew how important he was. I thought everybody talks about Hendrix. He must be really good, or I definitely need to pay attention, and learn some stuff from him. And then when I finally got into it, and it was like the light bulb turned on, I just became obsessed. And I'm still, a huge Hendrix fan for sure. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.